The year is 3000, and Earth is no longer just a speck in the vast cosmos. It is a jewel, the heart of the intergalactic trade route, a nexus where the civilizations of the universe converge. For millennia, humans had dreamed of touching the stars, but now their planet was the focal point, a trading hub for the most advanced technologies and alien artifacts. Species from countless star systems visited Earth, their ships slicing through the atmosphere in dazzling displays of light. Exchange for Earth's precious resources, metals, energy, and raw materials, humanity gained technological wonders that stretched the limits of imagination. Quantum computing systems that could predict the future, energy shields capable of repelling planetary-scale destruction, and neural interfaces that allowed people to connect their minds to machines. But this too came with a price, for not all visitors had come simply to trade. Dr. Alvarez, a scientist working in the Earth Intergalactic Trade Center, had seen it all. The glimmering ships, the multi-species meetings, the dazzling gifts of technology. She had spent years studying the trades, understanding the exchanges, and ensuring Earth's place in the grand galactic economy. But there were whispers, rumors, shadows of a deeper, more insidious plot. Something was amiss in the center's towering structures, and Eve had begun to notice strange patterns among the alien trade goods and the behavior of Earth's highest leaders. As the intergalactic clock ticked toward a momentous event, the unveiling of a new phase of trade, Eve felt an icy dread in her gut. She had no idea that the trade center, the heart of Earth's future, was about to become the setting of humanity's greatest betrayal. The Earth Intergalactic Trade Center stood as a monument to human achievement, its gleaming spires piercing the sky, visible from miles away across the vast cityscape of New York. A blend of advanced architecture and alien technology, the center was a testament to how far humanity had come. Yet its foundations were built on secrets far darker than any of its visitors could ever imagine. Dr. Alvarez, a woman of quiet brilliance and relentless curiosity, had been working at the center for nearly a decade. She was a resourceful scientist in her mid-30s, known for her expertise in xenotechnology, alien technologies that Earth had adopted and integrated into its own systems. A few years ago, she had been recruited to work in the heart of the center, a place where the fate of Earth's future was decided. She had spent her time researching alien technologies, documenting new innovations, and helping develop Earth's own contributions to the galactic trade. But lately, something had been bothering her. It started small, a misplaced shipment here, an unusually erratic alien technology there. At first, she chalked it up to human error or the quirks of unfamiliar technology. But as the days passed, Eve's intuition told her that there was something more to these anomalies. Her colleagues, mostly composed of diplomats, engineers, and scientists, seemed too distracted to notice. They were focused on the trade deals, the negotiations with various alien species, and the constant flow of trade that kept the center running like a well-oiled machine. To them, the trade center was a place of prosperity, a hub of galactic exchange that would ensure Earth's future for centuries to come. They couldn't fathom that beneath the surface of these dazzling gifts lay an insidious agenda. Eve, however, saw through the veneer of success. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a brilliant glow over the city's skyline, Eve stood alone in her lab. The hum of machines filled the silence, the soft glow of screens illuminating her face. She had been running an analysis on the most recent shipment from the Zanthorians, a species that on the surface seemed friendly enough, offering advanced energy shields in exchange for Earth's rare minerals. The deal had been heralded as a great success, a new partnership for humanity, but as Eve examined the data on the latest technology they had delivered, her unease deepened. The Zanthorian energy shield, she knew, had a strange, almost imperceptible energy signature. It was as if they were drawing from an unknown source, a source that didn't belong to Earth. She had attempted to cross-check the shield's energy levels with their own systems, but the readings had come back corrupted. The shields were fine, but they seemed to have a hidden layer, an invasive layer. Eve's fingers hovered over the holographic display, tracing the fluctuations in the data. "What are you hiding?" she muttered under her breath. The more she dug, the more she realized that these energy shields were just the tip of the iceberg. There were whispers in the trade center about the Zanthorians, rumors that their species wasn't as benevolent. As they appeared, some of the diplomats spoke of them with an unsettling reverence, almost as if they were afraid of the aliens, despite their seemingly friendly appearance. Eve's thoughts were interrupted by the soft ping of her communicator. It was a message from her colleague, Dr. Marcus Janssen, a senior scientist who worked in the center's weapons division. His message was short and to the point. "Meet me in the archives. Urgent." Eve's heart skipped a beat. The archives were located deep beneath the center, in an area that was restricted to high-level personnel only. She knew that Marcus was brilliant, but also had a tendency to dig into things that others preferred to leave alone. If he was calling her down to the archives, something big was going on. Without hesitation, she grabbed her datapad and rushed toward the lift. The corridors of the trade center were eerily quiet at this hour, the usual hum of voices replaced by the distant clatter of machines and the whir of security systems. Eve passed by vast rooms filled with alien technologies, quantum computers, gravimetric analyzers, and energy converters, but none of it caught her attention now. Her mind was solely focused on the task ahead. When she arrived at the archives, Marcus was already waiting by the entrance. His face was pale, his eyes wide with worry. "I found something," he whispered as he led her inside. "Something I wasn't supposed to." Eve followed him down a narrow corridor that led to an isolated room. The air felt thick with tension, and as Marcus keyed in a security override, the heavy door slid open, revealing rows of ancient-looking data drives and encrypted files. "I've been looking into the Zanthorians," Marcus began. "They're not who they say they are. I've found evidence, classified data, that suggests they've been manipulating Earth's leadership for years. These aren't just trade deals, they're infiltrations." Eve's breath caught in her throat. She had suspected something, but hearing Marcus confirm it felt like a punch to the gut. "This is bigger than we thought," she said softly. "The entire trade center could be compromised." And that was when Eve realized Earth wasn't just a pawn in a galactic economy. It was the target of a silent invasion. The Zanthorians weren't just here to trade. They were here to conquer. As Eve began to process this shocking revelation, the ground beneath the center rumbled faintly, almost as if something deep below had awakened. And for the first time, Eve felt the weight of a truth she wasn't sure she could escape. The hum of the trade center was a familiar comfort to Dr. Eve Alvarez. It was a rhythmic sound that echoed through the hallways, a constant pulse that mirrored the lifeblood of Earth's intergalactic economy. For years she had walked these corridors, her feet tapping in time with the hum, her mind consumed by the intricacies of alien technology. But now, each step she took felt heavier, as if the weight of the universe itself had shifted, its gravity pulling her toward a dark truth she was only beginning to understand. Eve couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something far bigger than the anomalies in the Zanthorian tech. The shadows she'd noticed in the system weren't just glitches, they were deliberate. And what Marcus had revealed to her in the archives had turned a nagging suspicion into a looming certainty. The Zanthorians were manipulating the very core of Earth's leadership. But why? How had they managed to infiltrate so deeply? The answers eluded her, slipping through her fingers like sand. Eve spent the next few days buried in her research. She worked tirelessly, combing through old trade records, searching for inconsistencies in the Zanthorian dealings. As she dug deeper into the archives, she found more disturbing patterns, hidden codes in trade agreements, covert technology exchanges, and most alarming of all, encrypted communications that seemed to be directed at high-ranking officials in Earth's governments. The mind-control tech that Marcus had hinted at was real, and it was everywhere. But there was no way to prove it without risking everything. It wasn't just the technology that had been altered. It was the very fabric of Earth's decision-making. Eve realized that the Zanthorians weren't just supplying tech. They were subtly influencing policy. They had created a web of control so delicate and intricate that no one could see it until it was too late. The first breakthrough came late one night. Eve was alone in her lab, her eyes red from hours of staring at screens, when she stumbled across a strange anomaly in the data. It was a subtle irregularity, something she had overlooked in her earlier investigations. A shipment of harmless energy converters from the Zanthorians, which had been hailed as an energy solution for underdeveloped regions, had been distributed to several key government facilities. Eve cross-referenced the facilities' locations with a map of Earth's most strategic military bases, and that's when it hit her. The converters were everywhere, but their true function was more sinister than anyone could imagine. They were not just for energy generation. They were tools of influence, placed in the heart of Earth's most powerful institutions. And the worst part was that they didn't just supply power, they suppressed it. These converters could emit a frequency that interfered with the brain's natural processes, gradually taking over the mind's autonomy and bending the will of anyone exposed to their pulse. Eve's heart raced as she pieced it together. The converters had been part of a quiet infiltration strategy, one that spanned decades. What had begun as a simple trade agreement for energy solutions had turned into a full-scale manipulation of Earth's military and political apparatus. It was as if the Zanthorians had been playing a long game, one so expertly crafted that it took years before it could even be detected. But Eve wasn't the only one who was starting to put the pieces together. Her colleague Marcus, the man who had led her to the archives, had been digging deeper into the files. And now, his urgency matched Eve's. Late one evening, Eve received a ping on her communicator. It was from Marcus. He was in the center's underground lab, the very one where Eve had spent countless hours studying alien technologies. "I need you here. Now," his message read. Eve felt her pulse quicken. She had already spent the day connecting dots, but something told her that Marcus had uncovered something critical, something that would push the stakes even higher. She grabbed her jacket and headed for the underground lab, the sense of urgency gnawing at her. The elevator ride down to the depths of the trade center felt colder than usual. As the lift descended, Eve stared at her reflection in the polished walls, her face a mix of determination and dread. She had suspected something for months, but this was more than she had ever imagined. The Zanthorians weren't just visitors. They were parasites, slowly consuming the soul of Earth. The time for investigation was over. It was time to act. When the elevator doors opened, Marcus was waiting for her, his face tense and pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. He led her down the sterile corridors to a secure room in the back, one that contained the oldest and most dangerous technology. The trade center held a repository of alien weapons and devices that had never been fully understood. Marcus turned to her, his voice barely a whisper. "I found something," he said, his eyes wide with fear. "Something big. I think I've uncovered the true purpose of the Zanthorians' plan. And I don't think they've been working alone." Eve's stomach dropped. "What do you mean? Who else is involved?" "I don't know yet," Marcus replied, his voice cracking. But it's not just the Zanthorians. There's another faction, another species helping them. I believe they've been working together to manipulate Earth's resources in ways we can't even imagine. Eve's mind raced as she followed him into the lab. On one of the tables, a holographic display flickered to life, showing a 3D map of Earth. Key locations flashed on the map: military bases, political centers, and trade hubs. But there was something odd about it. Some of the locations appeared to be under heavy surveillance, more so than others. Eve stepped closer to the map and saw that each marked location was surrounded by a faint blue outline, an anomaly that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. "That's the Zanthorian interference," Marcus explained, tapping a few buttons on the display. "It's a network, a web of influence and control, but there's more." He zoomed in on a spot in the center of the Earth. This is where they've been operating from, beneath the surface, under the trade center. It's a hidden base, an old Zanthorian facility, dormant until recently. Eve's blood ran cold. "They've been underground this whole time?" Marcus nodded grimly. "I think they've been waiting for the right moment, and that moment is now. They're ready to move." Eve stared at the map, her mind spinning. Everything was falling into place now. The strange frequency interference, the mind control, tech, the encrypted communications, all leading back to the hidden base beneath the Earth's surface. The Zanthorians had been preparing for this moment for centuries, carefully laying the groundwork for a silent invasion. But what was their ultimate goal? Why Earth? Before Eve could ask another question, a loud, shrill alarm sounded, followed by a voice over the intercom. "Warning! Security breach detected in Sector 12. All personnel report to evacuation stations immediately." Eve's heart sank. The moment she had feared had arrived. The invasion was no longer a theory. It was happening. The Zanthorians were ready to make their move. As she and Marcus raced to the emergency exits, Eve's mind whirled. The trade center, the heart of Earth's future, was about to become the battleground for humanity's survival. The corridors of the Earth Intergalactic Trade Center were chaotic, as alarms blared throughout the building. The sleek, metallic walls that once symbolized human progress now seemed to close in on Eve like a tomb. Security personnel rushed past her, their faces tight with fear as automated systems redirected people toward evacuation zones. But Eve couldn't leave. Not yet. Not when everything she had feared was coming true. Marcus was right beside her, his face pale under the harsh emergency lighting. He was no longer the calm, collected scientist she had known. His eyes darted nervously as he tried to make sense of the security breach notification. "This isn't just a drill. They've found us, Eve. We've been compromised." "I know," Eve replied, her voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest. "We need to get to the control room now." The control room was located in the highest level of the trade center, nestled deep within the structure's security zone. It was the nerve center of Earth's entire intergalactic operations, a place where trade deals were sealed, alien technologies were vetted, and the secrets of the universe were hidden in plain sight. If anyone could shed light on what was happening, on who was behind the breach, it was the command team inside the control room. Eve and Marcus fought their way through the panic-stricken crowds of evacuees, heading toward the central elevator banks. As they moved, Eve's mind raced. The strange frequencies, the subtle manipulations, it was all coming together in a way she hadn't anticipated. The Zanthorians had planned this for years, building an infrastructure of control so hidden, so seamless that no one could have suspected it until it was too late. But there was something more, something she couldn't yet put her finger on. The way Marcus had spoken about another faction, another species working with the Zanthorians, it gnawed at her like a puzzle with a piece missing. Who could possibly be working with them? The Zanthorians had been the dominant force in the trade route for centuries. Why would they need help? The elevator arrived with a soft chime, and the two stepped inside. The doors slid shut, and the lift ascended rapidly toward the control room. Eve turned to Marcus. "You said you found something in the archives, something about another species." Marcus hesitated before speaking. "Yes, but I couldn't confirm much. I only had a few fragmented records before I was cut off. I couldn't even decipher the name of the other species." Eve frowned. "Could it be a rogue faction, a splinter group within the Zanthorians?" "I don't think so. This feels like they've been waiting for something, for a trigger." The elevator reached its destination, and the doors opened with a soft swish. They emerged into a large, high-tech command center where officers were working frantically, their faces illuminated by holographic displays. Eve's eyes immediately scanned the room, her heart racing as she tried to make sense of the chaos unfolding before her. There were multiple incoming communications from other alien factions, distress signals, reports of strange activity across the galaxy, and, most worrying of all, status updates from military bases across Earth. The head of security, a tall man with short-cropped hair and steely eyes, looked up as Eve entered. "Dr. Alvarez," he said, his voice laced with tension. "We've been expecting you. There's something going on, and we can't explain it. It's all happening too fast." "What's happening?" Eve demanded, her pulse quickening. "What's causing the breach?" Before the security officer could respond, one of the communication officers interjected, her voice sharp and full of urgency. "We're receiving a transmission from the Zanthorians." Eve's stomach dropped. The Zanthorians? Here? Now? She moved quickly to the comms console, her mind already racing. The officer tapped a few commands, and a holographic image of a Zanthorian official materialized in front of them. It was a tall, slender figure with pale green skin, its elongated face an eerie mask of calm. Its eyes, however, were the most unsettling, a pair of obsidian black orbs that seemed to pierce through the hologram. "Greetings, Earthlings," the figure's voice resonated, cold and distant. "I am Valin, representative of the Zanthorian. High Command, it is time you understood the truth." The hologram flickered for a moment, and then Valin's image sharpened, his voice growing more ominous. "You have been led to believe that Earth is a prized jewel in the galactic trade route, that your resources and technologies are of great value to the intergalactic community, but you are mistaken." Eve's throat tightened. The Zanthorians had never been this bold, not in public. The transmission was being broadcast to the entire trade center and likely to the entire planet. She could feel the weight of the moment. This was not just a breach. It was the first move of an invasion. Blinn continued, his voice growing darker. "For centuries, we have watched Earth. We have studied your weaknesses, your leaders, your systems, your very psyche. It is fascinating. But now, it is time to take what is ours. Earth has been the perfect breeding ground for our plans. Your governments are already under our control, your military compromised. It is only a matter of time before the entire planet falls under our rule." Eve's breath caught in her throat. "No," she whispered. "This can't be." "The truth is undeniable, Dr. Alvarez," Valin interrupted, his expression cold. "You and the rest of your species will serve us. You will supply what we need, and then you will perish. Slowly, painfully, your world will crumble from within." Eve's mind raced as Valin's transmission cut off. The room was silent, save for the quiet hum of machines. She felt the weight of his words, the finality of the threat. The Zanthorians had already infiltrated Earth's leadership. This was no longer a conspiracy. It was a fact. And worse, they had orchestrated a slow collapse from within. But then, as Eve struggled to process what she had just heard, something else dawned on her. The transmission, the announcement, It wasn't just about taking control, it was about something else entirely. The Zanthorians were planning to siphon Earth's core energy, the very essence of the planet itself. The thought chilled her to her bones. They weren't just colonizing Earth, they were going to destroy it. That's it, Eve murmured, turning to Marcus. They've been siphoning Earth's core energy. It's been part of their plan all along. They're using us to mine the planet's power. Marcus's eyes widened. And they've been hiding it beneath the surface, Eve nodded. They've built a weapon, a machine, deep within the Earth's crust. And if they continue, they'll trigger a global collapse. The realization hit her with the force of a tidal wave. Earth's core, the very heart of the planet, was being drained. The Zanthorians had set in motion a process that would destabilize the planet's geological structure, causing an irreversible breakdown, a slow, catastrophic death. And Eve knew one thing for certain: if they didn't act fast, there would be no Earth left to save. But what terrified her more than the collapse itself was the growing suspicion that the Zanthorians weren't acting alone. There was another force at play here, one that was just as enigmatic and dangerous. But who were they, and why had they aligned themselves with the Zanthorians? Before she could ponder this further, the ground beneath the trade center began to tremble. It was a faint vibration at first, barely noticeable, but it quickly grew stronger, as if the earth itself were protesting. Eve's heart pounded in her chest. The countdown had begun. The Zanthorians were preparing for their final move. The ground trembled beneath their feet, a low, menacing rumble that reverberated through the trade center's foundation. The faint vibrations intensified, becoming an almost oppressive weight in the air. Eve's heart raced as she stood in the nerve center of Earth's future, her mind scrambling for answers. The Zanthorians had been playing a long game, and now the endgame was unfolding before her eyes. "What's happening?" Marcus asked, his voice shaky as the tremors continued to shake the building. He looked to Eve for answers, but she had none. The sheer magnitude of what they were facing was overwhelming. The core of Earth, the very lifeblood of the planet, was being siphoned. The Zanthorians were draining it, using advanced technology to destabilize the planet's geological structure. And if they didn't act quickly, Earth would be no more. "We need to get to the underground base," Eve said urgently, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We need to stop the machine now." Marcus nodded grimly. "But how? We don't even know where it's located." Eve's eyes flickered to the map displayed on the command center's central screen. It was a 3D model of the Earth with several marked locations deep beneath the surface. Vital military bases, strategic trade routes, and most importantly, a dark spot at the very center of the planet's core. The Zanthorians had built a hidden facility there, using it as both a staging ground for their invasion and a power source to drain Earth's core energy. The sheer magnitude of their operation was beyond anything Eve had imagined. "There," Eve said, pointing to the dark spot on the map. "That's where it's all happening." Marcus stepped closer to the screen, his face drawn with the weight of the revelation. "That's under the trade center, beneath us." Eve nodded. "It's not just the Zanthorians, Marcus. They're using advanced technology to manipulate the Earth's energy field, creating a feedback loop that could tear the planet apart. If we don't stop it, the collapse will accelerate." The tremors beneath their feet grew stronger, and Eve's gaze flickered back to the control room's main console. The other personnel were scrambling to prepare for evacuation, but it was clear that their efforts were futile. The building's systems were shutting down one by one. The trade center, once a symbol of Earth's prosperity, was now a ticking, time bomb. "We're running out of time," Eve said, her voice sharp with urgency. "The only way to stop this is to destroy the machine, but we need to get to it before the Zanthorians can activate it fully." Marcus looked at her with a mixture of dread and determination. "I'll help you, but we'll need a way to get down there. The elevators are offline, and the security systems are locking down all access points." Eve's eyes scanned the room, taking in the frantic efforts of the remaining personnel. They were all scrambling, trying to save themselves, but there was no saving this place, not now. Eve turned to the head of security, a man she had only spoken to briefly before. "Where's the nearest emergency access shaft?" she demanded. The security officer hesitated, but then pointed to a door on the far side of the room. "There's an access tunnel that leads directly to the lower levels, but it's not safe. The tremors are causing structural instability down there." "I don't care," Eve snapped, her frustration mounting. "It's our only option." Without waiting for a response, she motioned for Marcus to follow her, and they both sprinted toward the door. The security officer hesitated for a moment, before nodding and gesturing for two other guards to follow them. Together, they reached the emergency access point, a rusted, reinforced steel door designed to withstand the worst kinds of disasters. With a quick swipe of her ID, Eve unlocked the door, and it creaked open. A stale, musty air hit them immediately as they stepped inside. The emergency tunnel was narrow, its walls lined with old cables and pipes that hadn't been used in years. The dim light from the overhead bulbs flickered intermittently, casting long, eerie shadows down the corridor. The tremors continued, shaking the building with an almost rhythmic intensity. "I don't like this," Marcus muttered, his voice low. "Neither do I," Eve replied, her gaze fixed ahead. "But we don't have a choice." They moved quickly. Through the tunnel, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the confined space. As they ventured deeper, the tremors grew more pronounced, and the tunnel seemed to groan under the pressure. Eve's mind was racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. The Zanthorians had been planning this for decades, slowly infiltrating Earth's infrastructure, manipulating its leaders, and now they were going to destroy everything. But what troubled Eve more than anything was the question of why. Why Earth? Why now? As they moved through the dark, they finally reached a massive steel door at the end of the tunnel. The walls around them were lined with reinforced blast shields, and the door itself was emblazoned with a warning sign in multiple alien languages. This was it, the entry point to the hidden base. Marcus stepped forward and pulled out a handheld device, scanning the door for any signs of security. "It's locked," he said, frowning, "but there's a code. If we can get it right, we'll be in." Eve nodded, her mind focused. The code was likely a relic from an older time, one that the Zanthorians had either forgotten or simply didn't care about. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small data chip, one that she had swiped from the archives earlier. It contained encrypted files she had managed to crack. If she was right, the code was hidden inside these files. With shaking hands, Eve slotted the chip into the device, her fingers flying across the screen as she decoded the sequence. The tremors were growing more violent, and she could feel the ground shaking beneath her feet. The countdown was nearly over. They were running out of time. "Come on," she whispered under her breath, willing herself to stay calm. Finally, the device pinged, and the steel door hissed open with a groan. The base beyond was dark, the only light coming from dim emergency beacons scattered along the walls. The air was thick with the scent of dust and old technology. Eve and Marcus stepped inside, their footsteps muffled by the soft hum of machinery hidden in the shadows. As they moved deeper into the base, Eve's mind raced. The machine was here. She could feel it. The Zanthorians had built something far more advanced than anything Earth could even comprehend, a device that could siphon the planet's core energy and use it to power their invasion force. If it wasn't destroyed soon, the feedback loop would reach critical mass, and Earth would be torn apart from within. They rounded a corner and found themselves facing a massive chamber, the walls lined with alien machinery. In the center of the room, a towering structure stood, glowing with an eerie, pulsating light. It was the machine, the device that would end Earth as they knew it. But as Eve stepped closer, a sudden harsh voice echoed through the chamber. "You're too late." Eve froze. The voice was unmistakable. It was Valin, the Zanthorian representative. And then, from the shadows, he emerged, tall, imposing, his eyes gleaming with cold malice. "It's already begun," he continued, his voice low and filled with menace. "You cannot stop it now. Earth's fate is sealed." Eve's stomach twisted. They had been walking into a trap all along. The Zanthorians had known they would come. And now they were standing at the precipice of humanity's destruction. The ground trembled once more, stronger than ever. The machine hummed, its pulse growing louder, more insistent. The countdown was at 0, and then the floor beneath them began to crack. The floor beneath them trembled violently as the crack expanded, splitting the surface like a wound across the skin of the earth itself. Eve's heart raced, her breath shallow, as she instinctively grabbed Marcus's arm. The tremors grew louder, more destructive, and with each passing second, she could feel the very foundations of the planet shifting beneath her feet. This was it. This was the culmination of everything the Zanthorians had been planning for centuries. Valin's cold, calculating eyes locked onto hers, a malicious smirk twisting his pale green face. "I warned you, Dr. Alvarez," he said, his voice dripping with a sense of triumph. "The countdown has finished. The siphoning process is complete. The core energy is ours." Eve's mind raced, trying to make sense of the terrifying words he had just spoken. The machine, the device that had been siphoning Earth's energy, was now fully operational, and there was no way to stop it from tearing the planet apart. The ground was literally cracking beneath them, the room groaning. In protest, as the Zanthorian machinery hummed louder, feeding off the planet's lifeblood, Marcus's voice broke through her thoughts. "We can still stop it, right? We just need to destroy the core of the machine." Eve's eyes flickered toward the towering structure at the center of the chamber. It was massive, easily the size of a small building, and pulsing with an eerie blue light that seemed to reflect the dark energy it was siphoning from the Earth's core. The structure was composed of a network of Zanthorian technology, wires and cables twisting through the air like serpents, feeding the machine with raw energy. But beneath it all was something more insidious, something that went deeper than just technology. It was a weapon, a device designed not only to harness Earth's energy, but to destabilize the entire planet, triggering a chain reaction that would collapse the planet from within. "We don't have much time," Eve said, her voice steely with resolve. "We need to find the control center of the machine, destroy it from the inside. If we don't, this whole place will be swallowed up." Valin's laugh echoed through the chamber, sharp and cruel. "You think you can destroy what's already in motion? This machine is beyond your comprehension, Dr. Alvarez. You are mere ants beneath the weight of an empire." He stepped forward, the pulse of the machine growing stronger, matching the beat of his words. "Even if you manage to destroy the outer casing, the siphoning process is irreversible. Earth's core energy is already being drained at a rate that cannot be halted. You'll die here, along with the rest of your pathetic species. This is the price for defying the Zanthorian High Command." As the Zanthorian leader spoke, the cracks in the floor widened, and the ceiling above began to tremble, dust falling like rain from the beams. Eve barely noticed. Her focus was entirely on the machine, the way it hummed and pulsed with energy, the way the very air around it seemed to warp under the weight of its power. But there was something else, something hidden beneath the surface, something Eve's sharp mind had finally pieced together. "The siphoning process is only one part of it, isn't it?" Eve said aloud, her voice low and filled with a grim understanding. "You're using the energy to activate something else, aren't you? A weapon that will trigger a cataclysm." Valin's expression faltered for just a moment. A flicker of something, uncertainty perhaps, flashing across his face. But it was quickly replaced by a cold, calculating mask. "You are perceptive, Dr. Alvarez, but that will do you no good. The weapon has already been activated. Earth's core is now a beacon. When the process is complete, the entire planet will destabilize. All your cities, your infrastructure, all of it will crumble. The surface will fracture, oceans will boil, and your species will be reduced to nothing more than dust." Marcus's voice rose with desperation. "No! You can't! There has to be a way to stop this!" Valin's laugh was a hollow, mocking sound. "I told you, you are too late." Eve's mind raced, her thoughts a whirlwind of calculations. They had no time to fight Valin. Not directly. The Zanthorians had far too much power, and Valin was standing between them and the destruction of the machine. But Eve had learned something in all her years of research. There was always a weakness. There was always a way to disrupt the flow of energy, even when it seemed impossible. She scanned the room, her eyes landing on the central control panel attached to the machine's core. The structure of the machine itself was a blend of alien and human technology, fused together in a way that defied logic. But there was one thing Eve knew for sure. The Zanthorians were arrogant. They believed their technology was flawless, but no system, no matter how advanced, was infallible. Eve's hand found her communicator tucked into her belt, and she activated it. The screen blinked to life, and she quickly pulled up a schematic of the trade center's systems. "Marcus," she said, her voice low but steady, "I need you to hack into the building's central power grid. We need to redirect the energy from the core to the building's emergency systems. It's our only shot." Marcus's brow furrowed. "What? How does that help? The machine will just continue siphoning—" "No," Eve cut him off, her eyes locked onto the machine. "If we overload the system, if we redirect the energy into the trade center's core power, we'll cause a cascading failure. The siphoning device will overheat, and the destabilization will trigger an overload. It won't destroy the entire base, but it will shut the machine down." Marcus hesitated for a moment, his face tense with doubt. "But that'll destroy the trade center, Eve. We'll lose everything." "We don't have a choice," Eve said firmly. "We'll be gone in seconds if we don't do something." She turned back toward Valin, her expression hardening. "And you'll be the first to go when this place collapses." Valin's eyes narrowed, his smirk never faltering. "You're naive if you think you can win this, Dr. Alvarez. You can't stop what's already in motion." Eve's lips curled into a bitter smile. "We'll see about that." Without waiting for Marcus's response, she sprinted toward the control panel, her movements sharp and precise. Her fingers flew over the alien interface, bypassing security systems that were meant to be unbreakable. The hum of the machine grew louder, more insistent. But Eve didn't falter. She could feel the pressure mounting, the weight of Earth's future resting on her shoulders. She had to act fast. Marcus, meanwhile, was working at a terminal near the back of the room, his face illuminated by the glow of the power grid schematics. He muttered under his breath as he typed furiously, trying to override the system. Eve watched him for a moment, then returned her focus to the control panel. The countdown was ticking down. Time was running out. Suddenly, the walls of the chamber began to shake more violently. The machine had begun to overload. Eve's eyes shot to the power grid readout on her screen. The siphoning was drawing more power than the system could handle. It was only a matter of seconds before the entire facility would implode. "Marcus," Eve shouted, "I need more time." Marcus's voice came through the comms, his words strained. "I've got the override, but it's not enough. You need to—" A deafening crash reverberated through the room, and Eve barely had time to duck as a blast of energy shot out from the machine's core, shattering the walls and sending sparks, flying in all directions. The entire room was plunged into chaos, debris raining down as the air crackled with unstable energy. Eve stumbled, her heart pounding in her chest. The countdown had reached its final moments. The machine was no longer just a threat. It was an unstoppable force of destruction, but Eve refused to give up, not now. The explosion sent Eve flying backward, her body slamming against the steel wall with a sickening thud. For a moment, everything went black. The world around her was a blur of smoke, sparks, and the deafening hum of machinery spiraling into chaos. Her ears rang, the sound of her heartbeat loud in her skull. The force of the blast had knocked the air from her lungs, leaving her gasping as she struggled to push herself up. Pain shot through her body, but she ignored it. She couldn't afford to waste a second. She had to stop the machine. Eve's vision cleared slowly. The control room was a wreck, the walls fractured and debris scattered across the floor. The machine at the center of the room still pulsed with blue energy, its hum growing louder, more urgent, as though it was alive. And at its core, the siphoning process was accelerating. The ground beneath her feet was cracking, and she could feel the tremors worsening as the entire trade center seemed to be sinking into the depths of the earth. "Eve!" Marcus's voice cut through the haze, sharp with panic. "Eve, are you all right?" Eve's head swam as she pushed herself to her feet, her legs shaky beneath her. Her hand clutched the wall for support as she steadied herself. "I'm fine," she called back, her voice strained. "Get to the override terminal, we don't have much time." She took a deep breath and looked around. The blast had caused the room to buckle under the pressure, but it had also shifted things in her favor. The system was unstable. The energy feedback had created a critical failure, and the Zanthorian tech was in disarray. The siphoning was no longer a controlled process. It was spiraling out of control. The more energy the machine drew from the core, the more unstable it became. She couldn't stop the machine from drawing energy, but she could use its own instability to her advantage. Marcus was at the terminal now, furiously typing, his fingers a blur. "I'm in," he said, his voice tight with tension, "but I need you to give me access to the central core. I can't override the system without it." Eve nodded grimly. She turned her attention back to the central panel, her eyes scanning the glowing data streams that filled the screen. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. This wasn't just about stopping an alien invasion anymore. This was about saving the planet from complete annihilation. Her fingers flew over the interface, bypassing security protocols with practiced ease. Every second counted. She couldn't afford to hesitate as her hand hovered over the final command. A familiar voice cut through the chaos. "Don't do it." Eve's pulse spiked as she turned toward the source of the voice. There, standing at the far end of the room, was Valin, his alien eyes gleaming with a mixture of anger and amusement. He was no longer the composed representative of the Zanthorians. Now he was a monster, his body rippling with energy from the machine's unrelenting siphoning. His skin glowed with an unnatural blue tint, and his body seemed to hum with the same frequency as the machine itself. "You think you can stop this?" Valin's voice was a low growl, full of disdain. "You're too late, Eve. You can't fight what's already been set in motion." Eve's heart pounded as she took a step toward him. "You're wrong. It's not over yet." Valin's lips curled into a cruel smile. "You truly believe you can control this? You think you have the power to stop us? Your species is nothing. You're a fleeting moment in the history of the galaxy. The Zanthorians will reign supreme." The energy in the room surged, and the machine seemed to pulse with even more force, the blue light flickering erratically as it siphoned more power from Earth's core. Eve gritted her teeth, fighting the dizziness that threatened to overwhelm her. She had to stay focused. The fate of Earth was in her hands, and no matter what Valin said, she wasn't going to let him win. "I'm not doing this for power," Eve said, her voice sharp with resolve. "I'm doing this for Earth, for the people I've sworn to protect." Valin's laugh echoed through the chamber, hollow and mocking. "Your determination is admirable, but ultimately futile. I've already won, Dr. Alvarez. You and your kind are nothing more than ants beneath the weight of our empire. Eve's eyes narrowed. I don't need to beat you, she said. I just need to destroy the machine. Her fingers slammed down on the final key. The room seemed to hold its breath as the system hummed to life. The countdown to the machine's destruction began. The machine's pulse intensified, but for the first time, Eve saw a flicker of weakness in the energy. Flow. The Zanthorian tech was failing. The cascading feedback loop had reached critical mass, and there was no stopping it now. Valin's eyes widened with realization. He moved toward the console, his hand outstretched in a desperate attempt to override Eve's command. "No!" he snarled, his voice filled with venom. "You don't know what you're doing. If you destroy the machine, you'll destroy everything." Eve didn't hesitate. "I'm willing to make that sacrifice." Valin's hand was inches from the control panel when a powerful shockwave erupted from the core of the machine. The room shook violently as the energy feedback exploded in a burst of light, temporarily blinding Eve and causing her to stagger. Backward, the ground cracked further and the walls began to buckle. The machine was collapsing in on itself, a final act of desperation. She looked up just in time to see Valin stumble backward, his body writhing as the energy from the machine surged through him. The Zanthorian leader's eyes widened in shock as his body began to burn with the raw power of Earth's core. It was too late for him. The siphoning had taken its toll. Valin's body convulsed violently before he collapsed to the ground, a smoldering husk of his former self. Eve's heart raced as the countdown continued. The countdown was nearing its final seconds. She had done it. The machine was destabilizing, and the siphoning process was coming to an end. But as she turned to find Marcus, she felt a tremor beneath her feet. The explosion was coming. The destruction of the machine had triggered a chain reaction, and the entire facility was about to collapse. "Marcus," she shouted, her voice filled with panic. "We need to get out now." Marcus turned, his face pale with shock. The escape route. Where is it? Eve grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the back of the room, her mind racing. They didn't have much time. The entire structure was collapsing, and they needed to escape before the trade center was swallowed by the earth. As they sprinted through the chaos, debris falling all around them, Eve glanced back one last time. The Zanthorian machine, now a broken shell of its former self, was flickering out of existence. The countdown had finished, and the machine had been destroyed. The alien invasion, along with its deadly siphoning technology, was over. But the cost was immeasurable. Earth had been pushed to the brink, and even though they had won, Eve knew the battle for humanity's future was far from over. The ground beneath them cracked open, and the ceiling began to cave in. There was no more time for thoughts, only action. Eve's heart raced as she and Marcus raced toward the exit, the rumble of the collapsing trade center drowning out everything else. The world had fallen silent in the aftermath of the collapse. Eve could feel the weight of the silence pressing in on her, the echoes of destruction reverberating through her bones. She stood in the midst of the crumbling remains of the trade center, the once vibrant hub of intergalactic exchange, now nothing more than a smoldering ruin. The sun hung low in the sky, its light filtering through the smoke and haze, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. Earth had narrowly escaped annihilation, but at what cost? The world had been left fractured, its core energy drained and its infrastructure shattered. What remained of civilization was scattered, and the people of Earth, those who had survived, were now forced to rebuild. Marcus stood beside her, his eyes scanning the wreckage, a look of disbelief still etched on his face. He was covered in dirt and soot, his clothes torn and singed, but there was a spark of something else in his eyes, a glimmer of hope. "We did it," he said, his voice hoarse from the chaos. We stopped them. Eve nodded, her expression hard. We stopped them, but it's not over. The damage is done. The planet's core is unstable, and there's a long road ahead of us. Rebuilding, it's going to take years, maybe more. She turned away from the wreckage, her gaze focusing on the horizon. The world was forever changed, but humanity's fight for survival had only just begun. The Zanthorians were gone, but the consequences of their interference would be felt for generations. We've lost so much, Eve whispered. But we haven't lost everything. Marcus stepped closer, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. You saved humanity, Eve. You gave us a fighting chance. Eve looked up at him, her expression softening. She hadn't allowed herself to feel the weight of her victory. Not yet. There had been no time to mourn. There had been no time to reflect on the lives lost or the cities destroyed. But now, as the dust settled and the destruction finally came into focus, she knew the road ahead would be long and hard. We can rebuild, she said, her voice growing stronger. We have to. For the people who didn't make it, for the ones who are still out there, struggling to survive, we owe it to them. Marcus nodded, his eyes resolute. And we'll do it. Together. The world they had known was gone, but there was still hope. There was still life. And as long as there was life, there was a chance to start over. Eve glanced one last time at the ruins of the trade center, then turned away. The journey ahead would be uncertain, and the scars of the Zanthorian invasion would never truly fade. But Earth was alive, and as long as it was, she would continue to fight for it. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the air on her lungs, the tremors in the ground beneath her feet. The road to recovery was just beginning, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a spark of optimism. They had faced the unimaginable and survived. The Zanthorians were gone, but there was a larger question now. What would the human race do with its newfound freedom? What would Eve and Marcus and the rest of humanity do in the wake of their victory? The sun broke through the smoke, casting its light over the landscape like a promise that the darkness would eventually give way to light. The future was unknown, but for Eve, it was still hers to shape. She looked up at Marcus, then turned back to the horizon. Together, they would rebuild. Together, they would ensure that the mistakes of the past never happened again. And as the first stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, Eve couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. They had won, yes. But more than that, they had proved that even in the face of destruction, humanity could rise again. The dawn of a new era had arrived.